Nearly 2,000 jobs, gone in a single announcement. 25% of one town's homes wiped off the map in just one storm. And in another Florida town, more than half the people are living below the poverty line right now. This is the Florida nobody puts on a postcard. You've seen the beaches, the theme parks, the sunshine, but drive just a few miles off the tourist trail and you'll find something they don't want you to see. Main streets where half the shops are boarded up, factories going dark, whole towns quietly emptying out, one family, one paycheck, one hurricane at a time. Today we're pulling back the curtain on 10 Florida towns that are falling apart in real time and the shocking reasons why. Number 9, most Floridians don't even know it exists. Stick around till the end, because this changes how you see the Sunshine State forever. Number 1, Perry. We begin in Florida's Big Bend in a quiet town called Perry. For nearly 70 years, this place ran on one single thing, the Foley Cellulose Mill. It wasn't just a factory, it was the beating heart of the entire county. It's where fathers, sons, and grandsons all worked. It's where pine trees got turned into the paper behind household brands like Brawny and Quilted Northern. If you lived in Perry, chances are your paycheck traced back, one way or another, to that mill. Then in late 2023, the heart stopped beating. Georgia Pacific announced it was shutting the mill down for good. And the timing couldn't have been crueler. It came just 2 weeks after Hurricane Idalia slammed Perry with 125-mile-per-hour winds. The town was still picking up debris when the news landed. Here's where it gets truly staggering. Economists at the University of Florida crunched the numbers, and what they found is jaw-dropping. The closure wiped out roughly 2,000 jobs across the region and nearly $10 million in state and local taxes. The mill alone had accounted for more than 12% of every job in the county, and get this, a shocking 28% of the town's entire tax base. Stop and picture that for a second. Imagine more than a quarter of the money that keeps your streetlights glowing, your schools open, and your roads paved, just vanishing into thin air overnight. Today, Perry is desperately trying to reinvent itself, pinning its hopes on a new potato chip factory to fill the enormous hole left behind. It's a start, but it doesn't come close to replacing what was lost. As one local official put it, with a heavy voice, it's going to take years to see the damage this has done. Perry is the perfect, painful example of what happens when a town builds everything on a single foundation, and that foundation crumbles. Number 2, Cedar Key. Just down the coast lies Cedar Key, a tiny island community of only about 700 people. Locals lovingly call it Old Florida, and the moment you arrive, you understand why. There are no high-rises, no flashing neon signs, no crowds, just weathered clapboard buildings, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, and a way of life that moves at the gentle pace of the tide. It's the Florida your grandparents remember. But there's a serious problem. The Gulf of Mexico is closing in, and it's doing it fast. In just 13 months, Cedar Key was battered by 3 separate hurricanes: Idalia, then Debbie, then Helene. 3 storms, barely over a year. For a town this small, that's not bad luck. That's an all-out assault, and the damage was catastrophic. Reports indicate that roughly 25% of the town's homes were destroyed during Hurricane Helene alone. A quarter of the island's houses, gone in a single night. The recognition of Cedar Key's plight went national. In 2025, the National Trust for Historic Preservation named it one of America's 11 most endangered historic places. That's a designation meant to shine a spotlight on treasures that could disappear forever. But recognition doesn't rebuild homes. The town's mayor summed up the heartbreak perfectly. We have vision, we have plans, we have desires, but we don't have funds. We're a small town. We have a small community. And here lies the quiet tragedy of Cedar Key. When hurricanes start arriving faster than a small town can possibly rebuild, each new storm does more than just rip off roofs and flood streets. It plants a painful, unavoidable question in the mind of every single resident. Is it even worth staying anymore? Some are already choosing to leave. And every family that packs up and moves away takes a little more of Cedar Key's spirit with them. making the island's future feel more fragile with each passing storm season. Number 3. Belle Glade. Now we travel south to the shores of massive Lake Okeechobee and to a town called Belle Glade. All around it stretches an ocean of green, nearly 500,000 acres of sugarcane. The soil here is some of the richest, most productive farmland in the entire United States. Billions of dollars in sugar flow out of this region every year. You'd assume a town sitting on top of all that wealth would be thriving, right? The reality is the exact opposite, and it's heartbreaking. Belle Glade is consistently ranked among the poorest communities in the entire state of Florida. Here's the cruel, gut-wrenching irony at the center of it all. The sugar industry generates staggering fortunes, but almost none of that money stays with the ordinary people who actually live in the town. Historical census data revealed that at one point, more than 43% of households in Belle Glade were living in poverty. Think about that. Nearly half the town struggling to get by while surrounded by one of the most profitable crops on earth. And there's more the residents have to endure. Every harvest season, the fields are set ablaze in a practice known as sugarcane burning. The sky fills with thick smoke and drifting ash. Locals grimly call it black snow. It coats cars, homes, and lungs. Communities here have raised serious concerns about what breathing that air, year after year, does to their health. Belle Glade paints a portrait that challenges everything we assume about wealth. The crops are golden, the land is priceless, the industry is booming, and yet the opportunity for the people who live and work there remains painfully thin. It's a powerful, uncomfortable reminder of a truth that stretches far beyond Florida. Being close to money is not the same thing as sharing in it. Sometimes the richest land can sit right beside the poorest people, separated by a fence you can't climb. Number 4. Pahokee. Right next door to Belle Glade, hugging the eastern edge of that same enormous lake, sits Pahokee, and its story is so closely tied to its neighbors that you can't tell one without the other. If you talk to the old-timers here, their eyes light up. They'll tell you about a Pahokee that used to hum with life. A thriving little farming town packed with corn, beans, and fresh vegetables. Families worked the fields, kids filled the schools. The downtown had shops, diners, and a real sense of hope for the future. So what happened? How did a bustling town slide into decline? The answer is a slow-motion economic domino effect, and it's one you can trace, step by step, right down the main street. Over time, agriculture in the region shifted heavily toward sugarcane. Now here's the key detail most people miss. Sugarcane requires far fewer workers per acre than the vegetable crops it replaced. Machines do much of what human hands used to do. Fewer jobs meant fewer paychecks. Fewer paychecks meant families packing up and leaving town in search of work. Fewer people meant less tax money flowing into the town's budget. And less tax money meant a shrinking, struggling downtown, with shops closing their doors one by one. Watch that chain reaction long enough, and you get the Pahokee of today, a community carrying some of the highest poverty and unemployment rates in the entire state. The energy the old-timers remember has quietly drained away, replaced by empty storefronts and the sense of a town holding its breath. But buried inside Pahokee's decline is a lesson that echoes far beyond this one small Florida town. A warning for communities all across America. When a town leans its entire weight on a single industry, one quiet shift in that industry can unravel absolutely everything. No dramatic crash required, just a slow, steady fade. Number 5. Chattahoochee. Head all the way up to the Florida Panhandle now, near where the state brushes against the Georgia and Alabama borders, and you'll find a town named Chattahoochee. For generations, life here revolved almost entirely around one thing: a massive state psychiatric hospital. It was the town's largest employer, its economic engine, and its identity all rolled into one. If you grew up in Chattahoochee, odds were high that you, your parents, or your neighbors worked there. But here's the danger nobody saw coming. When you build an entire town around a single institution, that institution's fate quietly becomes your fate. As times changed and pressures mounted, that one pillar could no longer hold up the whole community leaning against it. And the numbers today are genuinely hard to look at. Census data shows that well over half of Chattahoochee's residents live below the poverty line. Some analyses push that figure even higher, above a staggering 60%. Let that sink in. That's not just a cold statistic on a spreadsheet. That's a majority of your neighbors, your kids' classmates, the people you pass on the street, all struggling to keep food on the table and the lights on. When poverty reaches those levels, it triggers a painful downward spiral. Local businesses can't survive without customers who have money to spend. Young people grow up and leave, chasing opportunities somewhere, anywhere else. And the ones who remain are often the elderly, the vulnerable, and those who simply have no other option. Each departure makes it harder for the town to ever climb back out. Chattahoochee is a textbook example of what researchers call an institution town, and it stands as a stark warning about what happens when the single institution a community was built upon can no longer carry the crushing weight of an entire town on its shoulders. When that one pillar cracks, the whole structure begins to sink. Number 6, Cross City. Next, we roll into rural Dixie County to a place with a name that tells you almost everything you need to know: Cross City. It earned that name simply because it's the spot where two roads happen to cross. And for a great many travelers zipping by, that's still all it is. A place you drive through on your way to somewhere more important. A blur in the rearview mirror. A gas station stop, if that. And that's exactly the heart of Cross City's problem. This town sits squarely inside the same struggling Big Bend timber economy that battered Perry, which means it's been hammered by the very same forces. A declining forestry and mill industry that once gave rural Floridians steady, honest work. As those timber and paper jobs dried up across the region, towns like Cross City had precious little to fall back on. There's no booming tourism here, no tech companies moving in, no new industry riding to the rescue. The result is a familiar and painful pattern. There's very little to attract fresh business or investment. Few young people see a future here, so they graduate and leave, chasing opportunity in Florida's big cities. And what's left behind is an aging population in a town that's slowly, quietly shrinking. When the streets grow quieter and the for sale signs multiply, a community starts to lose the very energy it needs to reinvent itself. Think about how fragile that foundation truly is. When the main economic reason for a town to even exist boils down to, well, you have to drive through it to get somewhere else. That's not a foundation at all. It's a shrug. Cross City delivers a sobering truth about the modern economy. The geography that once meant opportunity can quietly curdle into isolation. A crossroads used to mean commerce and connection. Today, it can just mean a place people pass by. Number 7, Century. Tucked into the very northern tip of the Florida Panhandle, pressed right up against the Alabama state line, sits a small town with a hopeful name, Century. It was christened for the dawn of the 20th century, a time when it was a booming lumber town, full of ambition, sawdust, and the optimistic belief that the good times would roll on forever. They didn't. That lumber boom faded into memory long ago, and Century has spent the decades since fighting a slow, grinding battle against population loss. Young people leave, businesses shutter, and the town gets a little quieter, a little emptier each year. But population decline was only part of the struggle. Then came the knockout punch from the sky. Hurricane Sally made a direct, devastating hit on the area, flattening homes, tearing apart infrastructure, and leaving a small, low-income community to somehow pick up the pieces. And here's the brutal part. Rebuilding in a town like Century is agonizingly, painfully slow. There simply isn't the money, the resources, or the workforce to bounce back quickly. Making matters dramatically worse is a crisis gripping the entire state right now. Florida's home insurance nightmare. Premiums have skyrocketed to punishing, sometimes impossible levels. And recent reporting reveals a cruel twist. This insurance crisis is hitting poorer inland counties especially hard. The very places, like Century, that can least afford it. Imagine trying to rebuild your storm-wrecked home, only to discover you can barely afford to insure it, or can't insure it at all. Century is a town that keeps getting knocked flat on its back and keeps somehow finding the strength to stand up again. You have to admire that grit. But with every new storm season and every fresh insurance hike, the simple act of standing back up gets a little harder and a little lonelier. How many more punches can one small town take? Number 8, the Homestead Fringe. Now let's travel to the opposite end of the state, the deep south of the peninsula, to the edges surrounding Homestead. Parts of this area carry a grim double burden. They rank among the highest poverty rates of any populated place in Florida, and at the same time, they sit in one of the most flood-vulnerable regions in the entire country. Poor and sinking. It's a combination that spells serious trouble. And here's the research that should genuinely stop you cold. The respected First Street Foundation has projected roughly $1.47 trillion in net property value losses across the nation over the next 30 years. A decline driven largely by insurance pressures and climate risk. That's trillion with a T. And South Florida's low-lying communities are sitting at ground zero of exactly that financial squeeze. The water is rising, the risk is climbing, and the money is getting nervous. So watch how the trap snaps shut on a neighborhood that's both poor and flood-prone. First, insurance premiums soar until they become simply unaffordable for working families. Next, without insurance and under constant flood threat, homes begin to lose their value. Then, when a flood inevitably strikes, families lack the funds to properly rebuild. And finally, seeing all that risk, outside investment dries up completely. Nobody wants to pour money into a place the water keeps reclaiming. Round and round it goes, tightening with each cycle. The most chilling part? None of this happens with a dramatic headline-grabbing bang. There's no single moment of collapse. Instead, it's a quiet financial erosion, happening one insurance renewal at a time, one declined claim at a time, one family quietly moving out at a time. The neighborhood doesn't fall apart overnight. It dissolves in slow motion, while the rest of the state barely notices it's happening at all. Number 9. Cypress Quarters. Now here's the one, the town I promised you at the very beginning, that most Floridians have never even heard of. It's a tiny community near Okeechobee called Cypress Quarters. It barely registers as a dot on the map. Blink while driving and you'll miss it entirely. And believe it or not, that near invisibility is precisely the heart of its problem. When a place is this small and this unknown, it falls into a heartbreaking blind spot, a kind of trap that's almost impossible to escape. The data tells a stark story. Rankings of poverty place Cypress Quarters among the very poorest places in the entire state of Florida, with well over half of its residents living below the poverty line. But unlike a big city or a famous town, there's no spotlight here, no news crews, no tourism campaigns, no economic development officials fighting for its future in front of cameras. And that's exactly the vicious cycle these micro-communities get caught in. They're too small to attract meaningful investment. Companies want customers and workforce, and there simply aren't enough here. They're too obscure to attract attention. No headlines means no pressure on anyone to help. And they're too under-resourced to advocate for themselves. A struggling town of this size doesn't have lobbyists, budgets, or a loud voice in the halls of power. So they simply slip through the cracks. Every single year, they fall a little further behind, and almost nobody outside the community even notices it's happening. Cypress Quarters represents an entire, largely hidden category of what you might call forgotten Florida. These are the micro-communities that never appear in the glossy tourism brochures or the upbeat economic forecasts. They don't make the news. They don't trend online. They just quietly exist on the margins, struggling, shrinking, and waiting for a helping hand that so far has never quite arrived. Number 10, Apalachicola. We end our journey back on the Gulf Coast in a genuinely beautiful and historic town, Apalachicola. And this one might just break your heart the most because its story is one of a proud identity slowly vanishing beneath the waves. For generations, Apalachicola wore a crown. It was the oyster capital of Florida, supplying a huge share of the entire state's oysters, all harvested from its famous fertile bay. This wasn't just an industry, it was a way of life. Entire families built their livelihoods on those waters. Fathers teaching sons how to tong for oysters, just as their fathers had taught them. The bay was the town's grocery store, its bank and its beating heart, all in one. Then the unthinkable happened. The oysters collapsed. A brutal combination of forces struck at once. Severe drought, years of overharvesting, and a dramatic reduction in the freshwater flowing down the river system that the oysters desperately needed to survive. The fishery was so completely devastated that officials were forced to shut down wild oyster harvesting in the bay entirely. A last-ditch, desperate attempt to give the population any chance to recover. Imagine being told the one thing your family has done for 100 years is now simply forbidden. And as if that weren't enough, there's another threat rising, literally. Florida's own climate researchers track measurable sea level rise at monitoring stations along this very stretch of coast. So now you have a town whose defining industry, whose cultural identity, and whose very shoreline are all under serious threat at the exact same time. Apalachicola remains genuinely postcard pretty, the kind of charming waterfront town that draws weekend visitors. But beneath that lovely surface is a working community, wrestling with a haunting, existential question. What do you become when the very thing you were built on simply disappears? So after all 10 of these towns, one big question remains. What actually ties them all together? What's the common thread running through Perry's silent mill, Cedar Key's battered shoreline, and the deep poverty of the Glades? Here's the surprising, sobering truth. It's rarely one single dramatic disaster that does a town in. There's almost never one big explosion, one movie-style moment of collapse. Instead, what you find is a quiet stack of pressures, piling up slowly over years. A single industry packs up and leaves. A relentless string of hurricanes rolls through. An insurance market prices ordinary families right out of their own homes. And a steady, painful drain of young people heads off to the big cities, chasing a future their hometown can no longer offer. And here's the truly dangerous part. Taken individually, any one of these blows is survivable. A town can bounce back from a bad storm. It can recover from losing one employer. It can weather a rough few years. But stacked together, all at once, one on top of another, they hollow a community out from the inside. Quietly, steadily. While the rest of the state is busy looking the other way, distracted by the beaches and the theme parks and the sunshine. That's the real story of these 10 towns. Not a bang, but a slow fade. Now I want to turn it over to you. If this opened your eyes to a side of Florida you'd never seen before, do me a quick favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And I truly want to hear from you. Is there a town near you quietly falling apart? Tell me its name in the comments. I read every single one, and your suggestion could become my very next video. And if places in decline fascinate you, go watch the video on your screen right now about America's fastest shrinking cities. Some of the names on that list will genuinely shock you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.